are considering, let me switch mics here.
So glad to hear that you're considering a run for public office, stepping up to serve this community in another capacity. Grateful that you would welcome us here back to Texarkana. This is, I don't know how many times we have visited this community. It's twice just during this race. We were here in June when I was not a candidate, working with you to register voters. I'm street legal in your community as a volunteer deputy registrar. If you're not registered to vote, I am licensed to bring you onto the rolls. We did that when we were with you here in June. I'm reminded by how different this is from my hometown of El Paso. These big, giant trees that you have. This beautiful, lush, green landscape. I come from the mountains and the desert of El Paso, right next to Ciudad Juarez in Chihuahua. Beautiful in its own right. But there cannot be two cities more that are further apart and still in the same state than Texarkana and El Paso. And yet I'm also struck by the fact that we have more in common here than would otherwise divide us, despite the distance between us, despite the fact that some are here, I hope, as Republicans, some are here as Democrats, some independents as well. Before we're any of those things, we're Texans, we're Americans, we're human beings, and we get back to treating one another with the respect and dignity that we deserve, because that's the most important thing between us. So thank you for being with us. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for showing up. And I bet you, as John just said, you're also here committed to doing the work necessary to make sure that we come through for one another, for Texas, and for this country. Not for the Democratic Party, not for Beto O'Rourke, not for any single one of us, but for all of us. And as I see these kids who are here right now, thank you if you brought your son or your daughter here with you today. When we had kids that were that age, we were not as brave and courageous as you. We watched this on the live stream and hear about it from friends who showed up afterwards. But you're here because you understand that these young people will, far more than any of us older people, have to bear the brunt of the consequences of the decisions that we make or fail to make at this defining moment of truth. This little guy's going to look back 20 years from the future, and he's going to say, hey, Mom, Dad, when all this was going on, what did you do? I read in my history books that in 2022, Texas was the toughest state in the nation in which to cast a ballot or register to vote. In our primary election in March of that year, 13% of the mail-in ballots were literally rejected. Not 13% of the people stayed home and didn't vote or couldn't figure out the rules of the road. They actually took the trouble of requesting a mail-in ballot, passed the bar, got it done, mailed it in, and got that ballot rejected. 13%. We were to watch the news tonight, and we were to see that in Venezuela, they held elections and 13% of the ballots were rejected. We'd say, you know what? That checks out. It's Venezuela. I don't think that's a real democracy. It's nothing like America. Well, that's happening in this state, and it's happening to people who have every right, in fact, who have secured the right for the rest of us to vote in the first place. A 95-year-old World War II veteran had his ballot rejected not once, but 3 separate times. If anyone among us has earned the right to vote, it is this man who was fighting fascism half a world away in 1944 to defend democracy at home. Our kids have every right to ask us, what the hell were you doing when this was going on? And we don't know, nor do we care if that 95-year-old World War II veteran is a Republican or a Democrat. No me importa. He's an American. He's a Texan. For 246 years, we've been able to make this experiment the exception in world history, the exception on the planet today. We've been able to make it work, more or less, always imperfectly, and yet always, I hope, trying to get it better. 246 years ago, you had better be white, you better be a man, and you better own some property if you want to participate. But over the years, we fought. We expanded this democracy. We added more people to the franchise. 1923, state legislature in Texas decides that if you're black, you can no longer participate in the Democratic primary. And at that time, there was not a Republican primary to speak of. Dr. Lawrence Nixon, you may have heard me talk about this guy, black physician in El Paso, starts the first chapter of the NAACP in this state in 1914, never misses an election. In 1924, the year after the all-white primary becomes the law of the land, he nonetheless pays his poll tax, takes it into fire station number 5, where he's never missed an election. The judges who know him by name say, Dr. Nixon, you know we can't let you vote. And he says, I know you can't, but I've got to try. So he takes his case to the local federal court. He loses, appeals it all the way up to the Supreme Court, wins not one, but 2 signal victories in the highest court in the land. Takes him 20 years. But by 1944, he's helped to win integration of our elections, paving the way for the first Texas president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, to sign into law the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which for the first time creates a multiracial democracy in the United States of America. They didn't invent that in New England. They didn't cook that up in California. That came from Texas. It came from men and women who served our nation in uniform. It came from civil rights and voting rights leaders like Dr. Lawrence Nixon, who fought and in some cases were willing to, and in some unfortunate instances did lose their lives for this democracy, to allow us to be here in this room actually exercising it today. Most important, most consequential election, at least in Texas history, is taking place in a little bit more than 3 months. And it's not up to anyone from outside of the state, any force larger than those of us in this room today. It's on you, it's on me, it's on each and every single one of us. We get that we are the heirs to the sacrifice, to the struggle, to the service that has preceded us and made this moment possible. We know full well that what we do with this inheritance will determine our future and define us in the eyes of our kids forever, right? So I'm going to make sure that when my kids, who today are 15 and 14 and 11 years old and are just kind of slightly aware of what we're doing, but I know at some point down the road there will be an accounting and there will be a judgment. Ladies and gentlemen, I fear nothing more in my life. I want to make sure that when they ask, I say, you know what? We didn't just sit back and take it. We didn't hope someone was going to ride to the rescue. We did not only hope that things would get better, but we did the work to make them so. We fought until every woman in the state could make her own decisions about her own body and decide her own future. We worked to make sure that every single educator, classroom teacher, counselor, librarian, not only didn't have to fear a governor who tells them what version of history they're allowed to teach. Are we allowed to know about Dr. Lawrence Nixon? Or is that going to be upsetting to some people? Does that run counter to the narrative that you would like to share about the state of Texas? Not only do we not want to be afraid of that or be asked to turn in the parents of transgender kids for the accusation of child abuse, to have their kids taken from their homes and turned over to a CPS foster care program that is the worst run in the nation, where 100 children have lost their lives just since the year 2020. No, we're going to do better than that. We're going to make sure that we acknowledge right here in Bowie County, the teacher on average is underpaid by $13,500 a year just to get to the national average. She is more likely than not working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, to support her habit of educating our kids in that classroom Monday through Friday. We're going to pay her enough so that she only works 1 job, focuses on those kids in front of her in the classroom. And she says, hey, Echo, these high pressure, high stakes standardized tests. They're great for the corporations who make the money off them. They do nothing to effectively measure the potential of that kid, the effort on the spending. We will cancel the STAR test in the state of Texas. If you're a retired teacher and you gave us the best years of your lives and you have not seen a cost of living adjustment since the year 2004, we're going to ensure there's one every single year going forward that matches inflation in the state of Texas. You deserve it. You earned it. We will do it. If you live in this state, and as John said, we don't lack for resources or wealth or riches. It's a $2 trillion economy. It's the 9th largest on the face of the planet. The biennial budget that the legislature sets, the governor signs, it's $250 billion a year that we spend on all manner of priorities. And yet, here we are, least insured in the United States of America. Number 1 for childhood death from diabetes. 51st in the nation after every state in the District of Columbia in access to mental health care, meaning that there are people in Bowie County right now who get arrested on purpose because they're uninsured. We haven't expanded Medicaid. They have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, clinical depression, cannot get treated, buying drugs off the streets to medicate themselves, and want to be taken to the one place that they're guaranteed any care whatsoever right now. That happens to be a county jail cell that costs you and me $120 a night. Make sure that they have a cot to sleep on, someone to look after them. Maybe, if they're lucky and they need it, some psychotropic medication that's prescribed for a few days, and then they're back out on the streets. It is the most expensive and immoral way to fail one another right now, because it's not as though the need goes away. You can have that diabetes, not have that prescription to insulin. At some point, the suffering for you and your family who's taking care of you becomes too much. You go down to the hospital. The outcomes are not as good as if you've been treated all along. The care, exponentially more expensive. Though you have not a dime to pay for it, it doesn't mean the bill goes away. You will see that on your property tax bill in Bowie County until we make a change. That's why, when we win, we're expanding Medicaid and bringing $10 billion more a year into the state of Texas. We want you to be healthy enough, to be well enough, to live to your full potential. Finish your education, go to work, start a business, create jobs, raise your family, run for political office. Whatever it is that you're on this planet to do in the first place, you should be healthy enough and well enough to get that done in the state of Texas. And listen, this isn't some foreign idea. Much like voting rights is not a foreign idea to the state of Texas. We came up with Medicaid in 1965. The same summer that LBJ signs the Voting Rights Act into law, he signs Medicaid into law. And the federal government right now says, listen, Texas, I would love to give you $10 billion of your federal income taxes that you Texans have paid up to us. It's here on this table in Washington, D.C. We'll send it back to you, but if you don't want it, I'm sure California and New York and Illinois. And then check this out for those of you from Arkansas or who have friends across that open border with our neighboring state. Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, our 4 border states, 3 with Republican governors, have all expanded this program. This is not good for Democrats. It doesn't have to be a Democratic idea. We'll work on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we bring in the money, expand the care, and the kicker is, when you're no longer on the hook for indigent care at your county hospital, your property taxes can come down as well. So this is something we're going to get done after we win this election. You all with me on this? Let's do it. And then there's this. As many of you have told me, as we've all learned in our own lives, every issue only becomes possible when you're able to take care of yourself, when you're able to take care of your family. Rents are rising, property taxes are going through the roof, When the governor in the energy capital of the world couldn't keep the lights on and the power failed and the grid broke down, your electricity bills have gone up on average $45 a month. Even if you're not within ERCOT, you are still paying the price for this guy's failure. When he shuts down the U.S.-Mexico border for more than a week, 2/3 of what we eat in terms of fresh produce comes from that other country, was rotting on the bridges. Your costs at the grocery store went through the roof as well. When all of that is compounded by the fact that the minimum wage in this state is still $7.25 an hour. When I'm talking to home health care attendants or their clients who have the benefit of being cared for by these home health care attendants. When I'm talking to parents who have kids at day school or daycare or preschool that's private, and I meet the people who work there and they can't afford it because they're making $8 an hour, $8.30 an hour, $10 if they're very lucky. It's getting harder and harder to survive in this state. So how do we address this? I mentioned how we're going to bring down property taxes in the state of Texas. We're also going to fix the grid, put ERCOT on the national grid. We're going to get the $11 billion that was stolen from us by pipeline CEOs and energy traders last February, return it to ratepayers in the state of Texas to bring down your electricity bills. Fight for a $15 an hour minimum wage. Nothing in the state of Texas. Make sure that if you want to go to college, you're able to go to college. That cost is not an object. If you want to be a teacher, and we're losing them by the thousands in this state right now. My Henry, who just completed 5th grade, is going into 6th, did not have a permanent classroom teacher a single day of last year. No matter what community I mention this in, people are telling me that they are experiencing the same thing as well. If you want to be a school teacher, a counselor, a librarian, at a time that we need them desperately, let's remove debt as an object out of your way. If you've taken it on, let's clear it if you want to work in an underserved community. We have a 20,000 nurse shortage. And I saw our nurse back here with the sign, Beto for nurses. 20,000 nurses short right now. The nurse-to-patient ratio in places where it should be 1:4 is 1:6, is 1:8, is 1:10. Nurses are electing to become travel nurses where they can make 2 or 3 times what they were making in the hospital or clinic that they were working at right here in Texarkana. An underserved community is even more underserved as a result. What about this? What about reinstituting something we used to have here, a bipartisan idea called the Rural Scholars Program? If you want to go to nursing school or medical school and you live in a place that is underrepresented in our medical school or nursing school populations, if you will agree to come back to Texarkana, to come back to Palestine, to come back to any of our communities that currently face this shortage for 6 years, we pay the full cost of your medical or nursing school tuition. That one is a 2% pay. Those are high-paying, high-skilled, high-value jobs. If you don't want to go to college, but you still want to make sure that you have a competitive skill, if you are fulfilled in life as a tradesman or tradeswoman, if you want to be an electrician and join the IBEW, if you want to be a carpenter, a plumber, pipe fitter, or a steel worker, if you want to work as a communications worker and you want to have the ability to join with others to learn that trade, to make sure that you can use the leverage of the value that you're providing to get better working conditions, improve safety, and higher wages, I want to make sure that in Texas there is a right to organize and a right to join a union, and for those unions to have some real power to stand up and fight for these workers wherever we are. So, as I get ready to turn the microphone over to you and to hear what is on your mind, let me just share this. You're going to be asked by that Republican mother-in-law of yours, or that doubting Democratic brother back at home who thinks, what does it matter whether I vote or not? Is anything going to change? Does this make a difference? Beto can't win Bowie County. The Republican mother-in-law might say, I this extremism from Abbott, this incompetence with the grid, this cruelty towards kids in the foster care system, this inability to respond to that mass shooting in Uvalde to provide the justice and accountability and the change that those parents deserve, and all of our kids need. She says, this is too much, but I don't know about voting for a Democrat. I mean, aren't they socialists? Aren't they every caricature that we've been told to think of by Abbott and others? I want you to share with them just what I shared with you. Say, listen, I went out, I heard Beto. He talked about world-class public schools by getting behind our public school educators. He wants the best jobs in America to be found right here in the state of Texas. And he's willing, and in fact, he wants to reach across the aisle to do smart, bipartisan things like expand Medicaid. Now, on the other side, mom or dad or brother or sister or friend, you've got somebody who is trying to tell us who we're supposed to hate, who we're supposed to be afraid of next, who wants to demagogue and vilify immigrants, or transgender kids, or members of the LGBT community, or has told women what they can and cannot do with their own bodies after half a century of Roe versus Wade, which was won, by the way, by Texas women, Jane Roe and her two attorneys, Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington from Abilene, Texas, who successfully argued that case. Say, look, that guy, Greg Abbott, that's extremism. That's fringe. That's a smallness that is not reflective of the bigness that we are as Texans. We want to do great things by and for one another. That's who we have always been. That's who we're going to be again. But, as John said earlier, that's on you and that's on me. I will not win this race on my own. It will not be won with or through the Democratic Party. This victory is only purchased by the people of Texas through their hard work. And I'll just be clear-eyed with you about this. It's going to be hard work. We have a little more than 3 months left to us to reach the critical number of voters who are going to decide the outcome of this election. Look, it's one thing if they see a TV ad, if they even watch TV, that says, Beto O'Rourke will do this, that, or the other, or Greg Abbott will do this, that, or the other. If they meet you knocking on their door, and in your own words, from your own heart, you say, this is why I've shown up. This is why I'm volunteering. This is why I am voting. I'm doing it for my kids. I'm doing it for that veteran who stood up and served us. I want to make sure we're serving him and her. I did this so that my daughter can make her own decisions about her own body. Whatever the reason is, you say that voter will never, ever forget the conversation. When, in the year of our Lord, 2022, do we have open, honest conversations with complete strangers about the future of this state and our country? It is the most powerful thing we can possibly do. There are a number of people who are wearing yellow vests and have these clipboards in their hands. If you all can raise those clipboards, they are willing to sign you up for a shift to go knock on doors. I don't have to tell you, it's hot outside. I've sweat through this set of clothes twice today already. You can see the salt rings around my knees. But it's going to be that kind of work to get the results that we want. And I heard Eddie Bernice Johnson, one of our great public leaders in Texas, say this. She said, look, hard work is not painful. What's painful is losing. What's painful is waking up on the morning of November 9th, after this election's been decided on the 8th, and saying, you know what, I could have done more. I should have knocked on those doors. I should have reached out to my neighbors. I should have expended every ounce of effort I had, given what was on the line, given what was at stake. We could have won that election, but for the work I did not put in. Now, that decision is yours to make. I will just tell you on my part, we are nonstop for the duration of this campaign. We've been on the road for the last 8 days. We're going to be on the road for the next 39 days straight. We'll take a weekend to be with our families, and we'll get right back on the road all the way through November 8th. I am going everywhere to listen to everyone, to ensure that no one is written off and no one is taken for granted. I want you to join me in this effort, and I want you, please, to join me in this victory. You all with me on this too? All right. Very grateful that you all will be here as we take microphone and bring it around the room for anyone who has a question or a comment, because the only way I have any hope of serving this community is to first listen to and learn from the people of this community. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge someone else who's going to be on the ballot on November 8th. He's running for the United States Congress for this region. I see him in every single one of these communities. And Jamar Jefferson is just at the back. He could be our next member of Congress. Wants to know he's out there. He wants to fight for you as well. All right, Ms. Condon.
In addition to our great congressional candidate, we also have Jean Matlock. She's a city council member. I think she's here right over there.
Thank you, Council Member.
And we have council member Mary Hart.
Thank you.
All right, if you all raise your hand, I will make my way around the room. Try not to bump everybody.
We've got a question right here, Ms. Connell. We're going to try to get as many questions, comments, voices into the conversation as possible. There's one more council member. Betty Williams, council member Betty Williams. She is hosting us in her district right now.
Hey!
And she's a retired teacher. All right, please.
Hi, I'm a huge fan, by the way. I saw you in Denver back in 2016. Your speech was amazing.
Thank you.
This is like meeting Sonic Youth backstage. As a future educator, I am genuinely scared. The things that are happening in Florida, the things that are happening in Texas. I mean, I want to be able to teach when I want to be able to teach. I don't want to be scared of teaching to kill a mockingbird. You know, I mean, I read that in high school, and I learned a lot about racism just from that book alone, and just by talking to people and interacting. What kind of incentives would you do for future educators if you were elected?
Thank you for the question. Your question includes, she's willing to go into the classroom at a time that we're losing teachers by the thousands. The official statistic in Texas, by the way, is that 50% of teachers in their first 5 years leave the profession in the state. So after they've taken on student loan debt, after we've invested in their education, after those kids have made a connection with them, they leave. And it's not for lack of love of those children. I mean, they're answering their calling by doing what you're about to do. But the conditions make it almost unbearable for far too many of them. And it's an exacerbating issue because the more teachers leave, the more load on the remaining teachers, the harder it is for them to stay, the more teachers that leave. So first and foremost, thank you for coming into the classroom. She asked, can she teach To Kill a Mockingbird going forward? Does that run afoul of Governor Abbott and the Republican majority and this boogeyman that they have created that I had never heard of before in my 49 years on this planet called CRT, or Critical Race Theory? I didn't know that I'd been taught CRT at Mesita Elementary in El Paso. I didn't know that was going on. Thank you for enlightening me. Maybe because it wasn't. Maybe because that is something that is taught in law schools and is not found in elementary or middle schools. But you know what? These folks are masters of distraction. Wait a second. I haven't fixed the grid. Energy prices have gone up 45 bucks. CRT. It's been 8 weeks since we've done anything about Uvalde, and I still haven't done anything, and kids are entering the classroom. Invasion from Mexico. They're going to do everything except own the problems that they have created. And this is the consequence that you're even wondering whether you can do this right now. Speaking of reading, you know, on the subject of reading, I've told some of you this before, but favorite book I've ever read, and it was in high school, was The Odyssey. And the only reason we named our oldest son Ulysses is because we didn't have the guts to name him Odysseus. That was the original plan. When I meet a junior at El Paso High, as I have, who tells me, as they did, that they're reading the abridged version of The Odyssey. And I said, well, why not read the whole thing? I think that's the greatest story ever told, one of the best books that we could possibly read. They say, well, we used to, back when you went here, Beto, but now we have to save so much time for standardized test prep. We're learning how to take the test. And we don't spend an hour or a day or a week. We spend weeks and sometimes months getting ready for that test. We're one of the last states in the union that requires passage of a high-stakes test like the STAR test in order to graduate from high school anymore. So, I don't want you to have to worry about teaching To Kill a Mockingbird. When I'm governor, you're going to be free to answer the calling that you just responded to connect with those kids, to stoke their curiosity, to make sure that they can follow their dreams and their interests, rise to their promise. You're also not going to be forced to focus on that high-stakes, high-pressure, standardized test. We're going to listen to you and other classroom teachers and devise a diagnostic instead of a test that you are going to have to prepare for with your kids that is used punitively to, harm your school district or your principal or your school. And in addition, to make sure that we can get this done when we win this, our next TEA commissioner will be a classroom teacher just like you. That's how we're going to get this done. Thanks for doing it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Texarkana.
Thank you.
We've all watched as a radical Republican Supreme Court has gone from one right to another, attempted to dismantle it. Roe v. Wade, 50 years of precedent out the window. They're looking at attacking Obergefell, same-sex marriage. Even Mike Braun talking about interracial marriage, overturning Loving versus Virginia. Should you become governor, you're most likely going to be faced with a hostile Republican legislature and potentially a Republican lieutenant governor. What concrete steps are you willing to take, or do you think you can take, to make sure that some of these very basic rights are enshrined in Texas and are not done away with by a federal body?
Thank you for asking. What a great question. And I love that you're asking about basic, fundamental rights. If we were talking about teacher salary, and O'Rourke wants to raise teacher salaries by $13,500 in low-paid communities like Bowie County, get it up to par with the country. There's probably going to have to be some room for consensus and negotiation, right? Maybe I start out at 15 and they start out at 8. We meet somewhere in the middle. Who knows? But on fundamental rights, what was so disappointing about the Supreme Court decision, disappointing doesn't begin to describe the response, what was so un-American about the Supreme Court decision is that when we have a basic fundamental right, this is not something you send back to the states for the legislatures or the voters to decide whether a black woman can marry a white man, whether two men can choose to love each other, or two women for that matter. We don't send it back to the states to decide if a woman can make her own decision about her own body or her own future. That right to privacy, as you just said, was the protection for it was won almost half a century ago. So we've got to fight with everything that we have to protect the protections that are there, to restore the ones that have been taken away. I'll use every tool at my disposal, from the veto, and if we have a failure of imagination, we'll end up in the same place. So let us just imagine what this state will be like when they can check your travel papers if you're of childbearing age and you're trying to cross the border into Arkansas or somewhere else. If they can hold an employer responsible for funding the out-of-state travel for women who want to make their own personal health care decisions, which they are doing right now, if they, which they're saying they're going to do right now, if they follow Justice Clarence Thomas's lead, who has promised in his consenting opinion in the Dobbs decision to put contraception, intimacy between same-sex couples, and marriage equality on the chopping block next, there is that ambitious Republican legislator who cannot wait to lead the charge this next session on every single one of those issues. Having the ability to veto them before they can ever see the light of day is really powerful. And not only does it stop the bad stuff, it is leverage to bring people to the table to work on the good stuff as well. And then imagine the shockwaves. As John just said, the last time this state elected a pro-choice, pro-equality, pro-civil rights governor was 32 years ago in 1990 with Ann Richards. Imagine if for the first time in more than 3 decades, we do it again. The thing that those state legislators care more about than anything else, if you were to administer truth serum to them and they were to tell you, is their own re-election. If they feel that they will not be able to stay in power because they're on the wrong side of these issues, as Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. That will be expressed in this election. That will give us the leverage we need to get this done for all of the rights you just described and every other right that will come under attack unless we win this one and fight like hell to protect them. Thanks for being here. Very grateful to you. Ms. Garland.
So I work in the foster care system, and I have seen, it is crazy, but it's crazy all over the country as well as Texas. But recently there was a House Bill 567 that passed that changed the definition of neglect and how they could remove children. And it was supposed to make biological parents have more rights and protect that. But I love what you said about people getting off the street and all that. We see that every day. We have a mom we're working with right now who has 5 kids and is about to be kicked out of her home, and she has nowhere to go. She can't work because she has no child care for her 5-month-old baby. But she has to work for 30 days before she can get that workforce child care pay. But my question is, we have seen things change and we've seen they're supposed to make things better. But the only way they're ever going to change is if we go upstream and started doing more prevention and early intervention. But Texas has not been willing to put money into prevention and early intervention funding. How would you work across party lines to help that change?
Thanks for this great question. I'm reminded by what a foster parent told us when we were visiting Childress, Texas. And she said, listen, understandably, so much of the attention and focus is on the kids in the system, but as you just pointed out, what we really need to do is to foster the family. If you're working $7.25 an hour, you may be working, in fact, chances are you're working 2 $7.25 an hour jobs. You may struggle to be able to give those kids the attention and the care that they need. If you are uninsured in the least insured state in America and you have a mental health care challenge, you have a primary health care challenge, struggling to medicate yourself or to heal yourself without help or intervention from anybody who practices medicine, that might compromise your ability to raise your kids in a safe environment. What are some things that we could do to change that? Well, I already mentioned expanding Medicaid. That would do a world of good. Raising the minimum wage. How about if your child is 3 or 4 years old, they would be guaranteed full day, all day universal pre-K in the state of Texas. There's a safe place for your child to go, 8 to 4 or 8 to 5. You are now freed to finish your education, to go get health care that you might need and might not have the time to pursue, to work a job, to start a business, to do all those things that you need to be able to do to be better for yourself so you can be better for that child. In addition, y además, this Texas economy loses out to the tune of $9 billion a year from parents who don't have kids, who can afford childcare, who don't have access to pre-K. They're locked at home with that kid, not out there unlocking their economic potential. This is a super smart investment that we make. So the question about early child intervention, I mean, starting at 0 through 4 or 5 years old when they're going to pre-K is such a smart thing for us to do in Texas. And listen, again, some of you are Democrats, some of you are Republicans. I'll just say this out loud. I know that Republicans care just as much as any Democrat about the well-being of those kids. If we work together to find a path that's responsible, it is economical, we are good fiduciaries of the public tax dollar, whatever concerns are raised by the other side, but we deliver this help and it produces a return, that's going to help us in the big cities that are so often represented by Democrats. I promise you, because I've just been visiting all these rural communities across the state, it will do a world of good in these underserved, rural, Republican represented communities. So I will be at that table working with them anytime, anywhere to make sure that we get this done. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
How you doing, sir?
Very good. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I would like to know what your position would be on if someone could bring some information to you that shows that someone has been, just say, they didn't get justice. They prove to you that this person didn't get any justice. What would your position be on that?
Everyone in this state, everyone in this country deserves equal treatment under the law. We know that that is not the case today, right? It may never have been the case in this country. We should never stop aspiring to make it so. In a state that locks up more people than any other state in the Union, in a country that locks up more people than any country on the face of the planet, in a state that today is allowing people to be sent to private prisons, meaning that there is a profit motive on the part of those who own the prisons to see more heads in more beds, more stiffer penalties, fewer reviews of what DAs and other prosecutors do around this state. We've got a conflict of interest in Texas. So, to your specific question, if that information is brought to me as governor, I'm going to make sure that our office intervenes not on behalf of the accused, but on the behalf of justice, the truth, and making sure that there's real accountability for all involved. Secondly, I'm going to make sure that we stop private prisons in the state of Texas. So we don't want to have and third, and without knowing any specifics of the case, but third, one of the reasons we have the largest prison population in this country is because we put so many people behind bars for a substance that is legal in most of the rest of the country. Anglo-Texans, African-American Texans, Mexican-American Texans, Asian-American Texans all use marijuana at roughly the same rate. Disproportionately, however, it is black and brown Texans who are stopped, who are frisked, who are incarcerated, who upon release have to check a box on every employment application form, every student loan application form, meaning it's less likely that they get that job or are able to pursue that education. So, in addition to, after we win this election, in addition to legalizing marijuana in Texas, we will expunge the arrest record for everybody who is incarcerated for possession in the state of Texas. Thank you. Good time.
I might have missed some folks over here that had their hand up. Anyone there or back there? I think that might be it. That's it. Oh, this gentleman right here.
And then I think we may have one more at the back, I heard.
Well, it seems that the United States Senate is forever going to block meaningful national gun reform. What can you do practically to take the AR-15s away?
I'm grateful for this question, and because it is such an important question. And because it is on the minds of so many of our fellow Texans, Texans who will agree with us, Texans who will disagree with us, and because ultimately we're responsible for actually making progress on this, I ask you to bear with me. I'll be as brief as I can, but this deserves a thoughtful answer. The AR-15, the AK-47 are two types of weapons that are freely sold in the state of Texas that were originally designed, they were originally engineered, they were originally sold to militaries like our own United States military to kill human beings on a battlefield. The AR-15, I learned this week, was designed to penetrate an enemy soldier's helmet at 500 feet away and to kill them. It was that weapon that 18-year-old Uvalde bought not once but twice over with hundreds of rounds of ammunition, shot those kids who did not have battle helmets on and didn't shoot them at 500 feet. He shot them as close as you and I are right now in this room. What doctors who attend to these shooting victims tell us is that high impact, high velocity round, it just liquefies and pulverizes everything inside you. Your organs, your arteries, soft tissue inside. I've met the survivors who have miraculously made it through for 6 or 7 months and then died in the 8th month because everything inside that would keep you alive no longer works. I've met the family members who've lost their kids, and the only way they could identify their children was by the shoes that they were wearing that day. We've seen it happen in El Paso. We've seen it happen in Uvalde. We've seen it happen in Midland. We've seen it happen in Sutherland Springs. We in this state have 5 of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history in just the last 5 years. And damn each and every single one of us if we allow it to continue going forward. So we owe our children, we owe those kids going into those classrooms to smart, clever. I know not everyone will agree with this, but I want to make sure I always give you the truth and how I honestly feel about this. Because of what I just described, I don't think any civilian should have an AR-15. It just doesn't make any sense. Others will come to a different conclusion. And I think rational, fully American, fully Texan friends and neighbors of ours can, and we've got to respect them, right? That's the genius of this democracy. We can disagree, but we'll do so civilly, and then we'll get to something that is better than what we have today. If we're unable to do that, sir, this is what I propose, and this is where I think there is strong bipartisan support. One, if you're going to buy an AR-15, at least be 21 years old and go through a full background check so that we can make sure that if you have a violent criminal history, if you have a history of beating your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or harming yourself, we can stop that sale before it's too late. Let's make sure that those background checks are universal in nature. Right now, if you buy at a gun store, you go through a background check. But Texas does not have universal checks, which means that you can buy from a private seller that very same weapon, no questions asked in this state, that gun is yours. It's exactly what happened in Midland, Odessa in 2019. The guy got rejected through a background check, bought from a private seller, shot and killed 8 people in that community with an AR-15. Second idea, or third idea, is a red flag law. That just says if you have a firearm in your house and you've threatened to kill yourself or to harm your spouse or boyfriend or to take that gun into that school and murder your classmates or the people at work, we can intervene through due process before it's too late. And once we determine that there's no longer a threat in your household or from you, we can return the firearm to its owner. Now, I mentioned El Paso, 23 people being slaughtered by a guy with an AK-47. When he ordered that gun, his mom called the police in Allen, Texas, where he lived, and she said, officer, there's something wrong here. I have no idea what my son wants to do with this AK-47. I don't know the full transcript of her conversation with them, but she was raising a flag to the police. Because we don't have a red flag law, all they could say is, I'm very sorry, ma'am, you are on your own. There's nothing that we can do. He drove that weapon 600 miles to El Paso to, as he told police afterwards, kill Mexicans and repel the invasion of Hispanics who were taking over this country. We could have stopped that shooting. The Uvalde shooter was sending signals off in every direction, so much so that prior to that school shooting, his friends called him a school shooter. Now, when we have that kind of information, for us not to be able to do anything, it's unacceptable to me. It sounds like it might be unacceptable to you. So look, we won't agree on everything on this critically important issue, whose views are very personally and strongly held by our fellow Texans. But we can look for common ground, and I think a universal background check, raising the minimum age of purchase, and red flag laws can save a lot of lives in this state. That's where I would start, sir. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
I have time for two more. And then somebody was asking me where they can get a shirt. In the room back over that way, they're selling t-shirts. And then we will also be there after the 2 questions. If anybody wants to say hi or take a picture.
We may even try to take a group photo
We're going to do that.
in this room.
Yes.
And then we're going to turn the heat up. And always
My name is Albert Hills. I'm a veteran from Vietnam. Last time we ran, but we weren't successful. But the only thing I disagree with you about is AR-16s. These high-powered weapons were not supposed to be in civilian life. They are made to murder people. I don't think that anybody, a hunter or anybody else should have one, and I don't think the police should have them either.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for saying what so many people feel right now.
I've seen what these things can do to people. And it's not supposed to be like that. We're not supposed to be mass murderers.
No. We were in Wichita Falls the week after the Parkland shooting a few years back. And I remember leaving a town hall just like this one, and a Vietnam era veteran just like you said, Beto, I had something very close to what an AR-15 is when I served in Vietnam in the 1960s. And he said that young man who shot those young kids in Parkland, he was better armed today than I was all the way back then. He said this makes no sense at all. And listen, there are those who may consider themselves Second Amendment purists. And they say, Beto, you cannot infringe on my right. And I'll just say to you, with all due respect, there is no right we have that is completely unconstricted or unrestrained. The First Amendment, free speech, you can't yell fire in a movie theater. You can't just say anything that you want to if it's going to hurt physically and harm and maybe kill other people. The Second Amendment, we can't carry howitzers and grenade launchers and roll around the streets and tanks because we've decided that there's going to be a line. In the 1930s, we had a problem where people were shooting each other up and murdering and slaughtering their fellow Americans with fully automatic machine guns. This country decided that that was a line that we had crossed on the other side, and they made it nearly impossible for you to own a machine gun today. Now, you legally can, but the hoops through which you have to jump, the part of the tax code that you want to follow, there's a reason that you have yet to read about kids being shot up with machine guns, fully automatic machine guns, or mass murders in movie theaters with fully automatic machine guns, or Walmarts, or anywhere else. It just doesn't happen because we decided as a country the line is here, machine guns are on this side, all of us are here. I think there is a legitimate interest right now in this conversation about AR-15s and AK-47s. After all of these mass shootings, how much more do we need to see? So, some folks said at the beginning of this campaign, well, that's going to be a real problem for Beto because he's made it clear that he's against private ownership of AR-15s and AK-47s. I welcome that conversation. I want us to have this debate. Look, more than I fear winning or losing this election, I fear the judgment of my kids who are going to look me in the eye and say, hey, Dad, you knew what the right thing was. Did you do it? And we know that the right thing is that no one should have an AR-15 or an AK-47 unless they're on a battlefield or in a theater of war. So that, to me, is where we ultimately need to be. But to the gentleman's point earlier about what are you going to be able to do day one, there's a lot of common ground there for us to start. Anyhow, thanks for asking the question, for your service to this country. Very grateful. This is our last one. No pressure.
Hi, Beto. When my parents came to the United States in the 90s, and I know that me losing my rights at 22 years old to reproduction, and my sister losing her rights at 17 was not a part of the American dream. Instead, Greg Abbott has made this the American nightmare. I am now a mom of a little girl, and I worry for not just myself, but for her as a future woman of Texas. What are you going to do to help protect reproductive rights for Texas women? Amen.
Let's meet those on the other side of this argument where they are, face value for what they're saying. You care about heartbeats? What about the heartbeats of those 100 kids that we lost in the foster care system since the year 2010? You care about life? What about the lives of Texas women who died in a maternal mortality crisis that is one of the worst in the developed world? When you shut down every reproductive health care clinic in the state of Texas, you also shut off many opportunities, and sometimes the only opportunity in some counties to get a cervical cancer screening or see a family planning provider or to see a doctor of any kind in the least insured state in America. For black women, it's 3 times as deadly to live in this state as it is for white women because of this maternal mortality crisis. Where's the concern about life or heartbeats there? It's not about life, I know you all know this. It's about power, it's about control. It's about power over the women of this state and control over the decisions that they make. We have to be the party, or the side, or the voters, because it shouldn't matter what party you belong to, that is for restoring that control and that power back to the very people, yourself, your daughter, every woman, every man in the state of Texas going forward. Now that is something that I have found most of our fellow Texans can get behind. When we remind them that this is a total abortion ban,
with no exception for rape and no exception for incest. When a reporter asked the governor at the bill signing ceremony, Mr. Governor, you realize there's no exception for rape, right? And like a deer caught in the headlights, he says, we're going to eliminate rape in the state of Texas. Sin vergüenza, this guy, right? And just in case you were curious, more rapes have been committed in this state than any other on this guy's watch. Just in case you're curious, the ability to bring rapists to justice has been cut in half on this guy's watch. In case you were curious, the Department of Public Safety, DPS, the same troopers who stood on the outside of that unlocked door in Uvalde, there are thousands of untested rape kits on the shelves of DPS offices today in the state of Texas. Do not for a second believe the bullshit about this being about life or heartbeats, about our fellow Texans, about power and control right now. We're going to make sure that you reach out to every Texan, even those who may have said, you know what, Beto, I considered myself pro-life in the past, but this total ban without exceptions, that's just too extreme. It's too much. This thing that you're threatening to check the travel papers of my daughter because she's of childbearing age. The young woman who is treated for arthritis with a medication that can coincidentally induce abortions, and because she's of childbearing age, her pharmacist in Texas will no longer prescribe it to her. Those who told us that they are now fearful that they will have to carry something inside of them that is dead, can no longer live, but because we have a total abortion ban, they'll have to do it nonetheless, may cause them to lose their lives as they go into sepsis and have other complications from their pregnancies. Listen to the providers. Listen, most of all, and I promise you as governor I will, to the women of Texas. That's who should decide. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. This time, who's in the picture? All right, I'm going to get down so I don't block anybody back here. Cynthia is back here. She's got a camera. She's going to try to get as many of us into the picture as well. Then we're going to, do we go outside where it's nice and cool, or is there...
We're gonna go and it's nice and cool because we're gonna take them all, but not all boys at the same time. So then we'll
Okay.
line will start out here, we'll take a picture quickly and then.
Hey, you pass this to Cynthia so she can give us instructions. Cynthia, you do that?
All right, everybody, you ready? We're gonna do two things. One, I am going to attempt to take a picture with all you beautiful people. I'm gonna do my best to get everybody in, so if you're not looking this way, please do. And then on the count of three, we're gonna say Texarkana. And then after we do the picture, if you all would like to stay and say hello, we're gonna be in the room next door and we'll go really quickly. We're gonna do a quick picture, a quick hello, if you all would like to join us. All right, here we go on the count of three. Y'all ready? Might have to do a few, but they have this 0.5 now. Y'all know what I'm talking about? So get everybody in. All right, 1, 2, 3, Texarkana! Keep going, get everybody in. Yes, thank you so much.